Right, so our first panel, we've loosely titled Economy, and we have three panelists. We have Tom Rouse, that has come here kindly from the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Tom, please join us. We have Ros Kellaway, Senior Partner at Eversheds, that is a legal firm we've worked with in the MIA for decades, and there's not much Ros doesn't know about the law. Competition law, Ros is an expert in as well, so Ros is kindly going to help us on the panel as well, Ros. And then finally, Charles Porter of SGMFX, which is a foreign currency broker we've worked with for many years that may be able to offer some advice, obviously, on the likely state of the currencies going forward. And what we're going to do, where's Charles? Here he is. We're going to ask each of the panelists to offer a few thoughts, a few minutes of ideas, comments, things you might need to be considering. And then we've got an hour for this panel, so we've deliberately given it that long so that there's plenty of time for you to ask questions. And please do. They won't know all the answers any more than any of us will know all the answers, but it's our best shot at this point in time at trying to provide some structure to what maybe your business should be considering. So, Tom, anything you'd like to tell our industry about?
Hello. Is this?
Yep, you're on.
Is this thing on? Brilliant. Hi. So, yeah, Tom Rouse from Department of Digital, Media and Sport. What I'll sort of start with, rather than launching into my personal opinions on what or won't happen with the economy, is I'll just start by sort of saying what it is I do and what my role here really can be. So I am here representing the government. I'm not an MP, so it's not my fault. I'm a civil servant, I'm a government official. That does mean that I'm bound by the Civil Service Code, so I can't speculate too much about the political outcomes, the economic outcomes with that hat on. What I've been doing is, along with a large number of colleagues in Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, is I've been attempting to coordinate the government's no-deal messaging, how to prepare for no deal for the arts, heritage and culture sectors. So obviously stuff that impacts you guys. I haven't been too involved in the sort of Brexit impact assessments, but what I am here to do, what I am here for really is I'm in listening mode. I want to pick up on your concerns, the things that you think will economically, logistically, financially, theoretically affect your businesses across your industries and across your work. And as I say, I won't offer too much proactive comment on that, but what I can do is take what you tell me away and report that upwards. One thing that Brexit has done is increase our channels for communicating what's happening on the ground directly up the chain to the ministers who are actually making or not making the decisions relating to Brexit. So I won't take the bait and give too much of an assessment of what Brexit's going to do to the economy right now. I will pass over to my fellow panel members for something more convincing on that front.
Ros?
Well, most people here will know that I am predominantly an EU and competition lawyer, and I'm certainly not an economist. However, I have done a bit of most recent research on estimates on the impact on the economy of the different types of consequences that there could be from the vote to leave the EU. And I understand the government's assessment in relation to Mrs. May's deal was that GDP would drop by 2.1%. The Guardian, and I think one does have to realise that everybody has their view on Brexit, so I think it's important to know what the source of this assessment is. The Guardian suggests that Mr. Johnson's deal could result in a drop in GDP of 6.7%, which actually felt unlikely because the Bank of England assessment of a no deal was initially of between 6 to 8%, I think it was, and that has dropped recently to 4 to 5% because of the perceived level of preparedness of UK business. So I feel that the Guardian's assessment is rather high, but the government at the moment is not giving its assessment of the impact on the economy of Mr. Johnson's deal. And there was a report recently that the Chancellor said that it was not proposed to give such an assessment. So what's the impact of staying in? Well, it could still be a drop in GDP because we don't know whether a recession is coming. But of course, if there is a deal, there will be a transitional period. And during that transitional period, everything effectively will stay the same. So what's the impact of coming out and then actually concluding some new trade deals? And on that, the new trade deals, the government's own analysis said that if there were new trade deals, that would boost GDP by between 0.2 and 0.7%. So I think the realistic assessment is that certainly in the short term, whether it's Mr. Johnson's deal or no deal, there will be arguably an adverse impact on GDP. I think the other point to understand is about new trade deals. One of the perceived benefits, as I've explained, of coming... Hello? No? Yes, better. One of the perceived benefits of coming out is the ability to control our own trade policy. One of the things you give up if you are in the union is the union takes control of the commercial policy and they decide what trade deals they will do. I do think there is a difference of view about the likelihood and potential benefits of new trade deals if we're outside of the EU. And if I explain that if you're in the EU as the UK, you're part of a 520 million people free trade area, and outside of it, you're basically talking about the population of the UK, I think there is a difference in attractiveness as a free trade agreement partner, if you like, in those two scenarios. However, some quite important trading blocs have indicated their interest in doing a free trade deal with us once we leave, including in particular the United States. So that's the sort of future picture, perhaps, of what the short-term economic impact could be. Do you want me to say something at this point, Paul, about getting ready for leaving? Yeah, okay. Well, in terms of getting ready for leaving, that's actually a massive subject. And if you go on my firm's Brexit hub, and plenty of big firms have a big page on their site about Brexit, you will see that there are a whole range of specialists who have provided advice, information, views about the impact of Brexit on different areas of business. So to summarise that in short order is quite challenging, but I'm going to do my best, because as a competition lawyer, I deal with a huge amount of contracts. What does the contract do, and is it anti-competitive or not? And there are very basic things that you do need to think about in relation to your contracts. And I think I would start with, if you're not particularly ready and you think you could be impacted by what are perceived to be some quite significant logistic difficulties that could arise in the event of no deal, for example, will your force majeure clause help you? And I have to say that because force majeure is designed to address unexpected, unforeseen consequences, the legal view, and that's been the case from the beginning, is that it won't. So if you are relying on your force majeure clause to get you out of a mess in the event of real supply chain difficulties or other service difficulties, you can't get the necessary person into the member state that you need to send them to, and we're really assuming here there's no transitional period and there's a hard exit, then you do not rely on your force majeure clause. The other thing I would say is, who here is prepared for the impact of data privacy laws if we leave without a deal in relation to their contracts? Who's thought about that? Okay, well, that is something you must think about. On that basis, I would urge you, if you do nothing else, go onto our site and see what it says about the model clauses that you need to include in your contracts. If there is any possibility that the contracts that you have involve the export of personal data from what will be an EU member state to the UK. Because although the UK recognises EU data privacy rules, the EU has not yet recognised ours, despite the fact that we have also implemented the GDPR. So you have to do something about that urgently. My own firm this week is sending out letters to all the clients explaining what clauses we're importing into our service contracts with them to make sure that the data that needs to move outside the EU into the UK, that is private data covered by the privacy rules, can safely move and that they can send it. Because that's potentially quite a big barrier to quite a lot of services businesses. So I've mentioned that. The other thing I would mention is that we've been living in a very comfy world about choice of law and jurisdiction, where there are EU-wide rules about the recognition of choice of law clauses and choice of jurisdiction clauses. And we are leaving that world. And although things won't be impossible because the government's going to adhere to the Hague Convention, which is a different piece of international law, which gives some benefits, in practical terms, I would advise everybody to dust off their choice of law and jurisdiction clauses and to make sure that their choice of law clause will include both EU law and UK law, and also that their choice of jurisdiction clauses are framed so that if you want jurisdiction for UK courts, it says exclusive jurisdiction, or you should use arbitration. So that's another very practical point. There are lots more points about contracts, and there's a lot of information on our website about them. But I think if I had to pick out three things, it would be those.
That's lovely, Ros. Thank you very much. And Charles, many of the companies in this room will deal in foreign currencies day in, day out for their various transactions. What are your thoughts coming from your side?
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure to cover those. Obviously, that's why we're sitting here. Just a brief introduction. I was very excited, and still am, when I saw the title of this little section entitled Economy. So I believed this was an opportunity to start rambling on about things like marginal propensities to import and all this kind of thing, but that won't be of any use, I think, to any of you, and nor is it to me. So what I would like to speak to you guys about instead is perhaps a little bit about how I perceive the impact of Brexit already on your businesses as a result of currency movements, and also how I think you guys might better adapt to those future currency movements as we transition towards a Brexit and what comes from here on out. And hopefully to give you guys a little bit of an insight as to how you might protect yourselves against these kind of developments. Tom, one other thing, I absolutely loved your introduction. He's a politician but not an MP, so it's not his fault. I'm representing financial services, but I'm not a financier, so again, it's not my fault. What's happened so far? So obviously the referendum that we saw led to a 15% depreciation in your trade-weighted value of your pound. So whether you're trading with America, with the Eurozone, with Japan, on average, the value of your currency that you hold, if you're sterling rich, fell by 15%. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of you in this room will import raw materials or primary, secondary materials in order to create the things that you then sell in the UK or that you sell abroad. But for some of you, you'll be more fortunate with this kind of thing. You would have been exporters of goods that you primarily source the materials for in the United Kingdom, and therefore, what hopefully you might have seen is an increase in the competitiveness of your pricing abroad. Now that's great, but what financial services and what foreign exchange as an industry allows people to do is to make sure that the impact to those people that are disadvantaged by a currency depreciation match sort of feel the same warmth from that effect as the people that would naturally benefit. The reason being, whatever the exchange rate is on a particular day, whether today, for example, it's 1.28, £1 is 1.28 US dollars. whatever happens with Brexit, your pound can still be 1.28 US dollars. 1.28 may be the most horrific number that you've experienced in nearly 20 years. So sort of post the Asian markets currency crisis, when we sort of saw these levels once again, you may really be suffering with the 128, in which case you want to eschew it as quickly as possible. But thankfully, with volatility, we actually have the opportunity in financial markets to make sure that people get priced into the levels that they want to. So one thing that I would definitely propose as an idea for you guys to take away from today would be, how am I going to be impacted by Brexit with respect to my dealings abroad, and how are my clients, if they are abroad, going to be impacted with respect to their dealings from me? Now, I hope you've got sort of three very varied interpretations of that. You've obviously got Tom's interpretation of the political process through which we might achieve that. You've got Roz's, how am I actually going to be able to do commerce with these peoples that I've done, that I've engaged with before in the future? But hopefully from me, you might be able to say, okay, well, I know that I can do it now. I know how I'm going to get towards this stage, but how profitable is it going to be for me? How much can I afford in terms of cost and fluctuation and risk from what I'm paying for my stuff abroad or what I'm receiving from my buyers abroad? That's hopefully what I can give to you. So what we've seen recently is a massive change in markets, and this is the thing that I'll briefly talk to you about now. So we've got the market that we all see. It's plain and open, and we can literally Google what is £1 in terms of euros, and it will tell us. But there's so many markets behind that that your conventional business sometimes doesn't get access to. We sometimes see flash headlines from the Financial Times that sits below me saying the expected volatility in the pound sterling is up by 16% over the next month. And what that literally means is that markets are pricing a probability of 16% change in the value of our pounds in 1 month's time, 2 months' time, 3 months' time. But how can anyone actually access that? And more importantly, how can we predict that change in order to make sure that we're not on the losing side of that 16%? Now, that 16% is a real figure. The expected volatility in derivative markets said that on the 1st of November versus the 31st of October, the value of every pound that is in our pockets in this room and in our bank accounts will change. We don't know what direction. Will change by an expected 16%. It's gone, right? This effect of the 31st of October to the 1st of November has now disappeared. The 16% is now something more like 9, because we don't think we're going to have a no deal, nor do we even believe that perhaps we're going to have an exit at all on the 31st of October. So the important thing that we're dealing with at the moment is that uncertainty is incredibly expensive. So if this 128 level is a good thing for you, if this 115, 16, 14 level on sterling euro is a good level for you, then you guys should be buying these contracts now so that you can use them to make sure that you remain as competitive as you were last year once we actually finally leave the European Union. Briefly, with respect to Brexit, obviously we are seeing some of these tailwinds now because so much uncertainty was priced into the economy over the last few years since the referendum, that in fact these upward revisions to growth and expectations are positive for our domestic growth. So with respect to currencies, not a huge impact. However, hopefully with respect to a little bit of homegrown productivity and output increase, the cheapness of our currency at the moment might facilitate a little bit more activity abroad. So optimism, I think, from this side.
Thanks very much, Charles. Well, as we said, this is more about your questions than these guys. So please, who's got a question? And if it's for anyone in particular, let us know. Otherwise, we'll just ask who on the panel feels best qualified to try and give an answer. Don't be shy. We'll just get a microphone to you. Hang on a second. If you can just say who you are and where you're from so the guys have an idea of what sort of business you're involved with.
Good morning, all. Brian Miller from Dennis Wick Products. We're based on Poole in the South Coast. We manufacture mouthpieces and mutes for brass musical instruments. Ros, a question to you, please. You were saying that whatever scenario we have for exiting Brexit or not, that there will be a hit on GDP. Initially, have you any feel for how long that might be?
I mean, it would purely be a personal opinion. From what I've read, the impact of the hit, I think, depends on the quality of the trade deal that's finally concluded with the EU. because you have to remember we've got this horrible two-stage process, which is to get out, which is the withdrawal agreement, and then to conclude the free trade agreement. And the bare bones of that, and they're not binding, is what is contained in the political declaration. And equally then, at the same time, the government will be trying to negotiate free trade agreements with other countries around the world. And we start from behind because the EU has 52 free trade agreements around the world. And at the last count, you may know better how many they've managed to replicate for when we leave. But the last time I heard, it was somewhere between 10 and 12. And I was quite surprised they'd managed that, because it takes years to negotiate a free trade agreement. I mean, the Canada deal took 7 years. And, my big concern is I can see a case that in the short term you look at this hit, but you feel that there are other benefits, because life isn't just about impact on GDP. For those people who hate the idea another court, not controlled by the UK Parliament, can take decisions that affect our laws, all of, the elements of control, all of those. I accept that there's a whole set of views out there about that, but the time for the transition is, I think, one of the biggest issues. And that's why Mrs. May's deal actually represented a soft Brexit. And she was very clear that if there needed to be extensions of the transitional period, she would be looking at those, perhaps not beyond July 2022. But it gives everybody in this room who hasn't really looked at their contracts terribly closely, or doesn't really see what the impact of currency movements could be on their business, or logistics issues, it gives everybody time in which to make these adjustments. So if I'm putting my money on it, I think you'd be looking at 5 years of decline, and then maybe at the end of that we might start to come back up, but we will not be where we would be if we'd stayed in economically.
Anyone else?
Paul, I just thought it might be worth adding something else to that. I thought it's important, obviously, moving forward to you guys. The end of 2020 isn't, frankly, a very long time away, particularly when we're considering companies' contracts that hold things open for a long time. If we were looking towards increasing the duration of this transition deal, which obviously, don't forget, each time we miss a deadline for Brexit and the transition deadline remains the same, the amount of time that the United Kingdom has to adjust and to negotiate this new free trade deal with the EU is decreasing. Now, it would be brilliant if we could increase the transition deal, and it might be something that the government is asked to do. So obviously when this exit agreement finally comes to being in the committee stages, and committees come forward to the government and say, I would like you to put an amendment on this deal to ask for a longer transition period, they'll be forced to ask for it. But I would like to shed a little bit of caution on whether they'll be able to. So when Theresa May and her entourage was negotiating with Michel Barnier and his entourage, they were told that they couldn't have an extension for very much longer, purely because the European Union operates on something called a multi-annual financial framework, which is 5 to 7 years, whereby they negotiate the budget, albeit a very small budget, the money that they have available in order to spend, and the priorities that they're going to set for themselves in order to spend that money. The end of that multi-annual financial framework period is thought to be, well, it can be slightly longer, but it's thought to be the 31st of December 2020. So the idea is that the United Kingdom, if it's leaving, should not be part of the spending pledges made for the next 5 to 7 years. So politically, it's going to be really, really hard to negotiate that transition period. So I would say anything that you can do to prepare yourself for the inevitability of perhaps not having a totally agreed free trade agreement on the 31st of December 2020 would be a really important thing to do.
Okay, I completely agree that hard exit preparations have simply moved out. They have moved out. Oh, I hope they've moved out. I hope we're going to get the extension, and one way or another we'll agree the deal. And if that happens, that the hard exit just moves out to the 31st of December 2020. That's all it does. No work that I'm doing now for those clients who are preparing for a hard exit will be wasted. It will always be needed, because there is still the possibility of a hard exit, in my opinion, a a probability of a hard exit in December 2020, because it would appear that to agree a free trade deal in such a short period would be completely unprecedented. Where I think I differ from you is my perception about the EU's willingness to extend the transitional period. There will inevitably be a price attached to that, because basically what we would be doing would be paying for access, continued full access to the single market, and participation in all the EU schemes that we currently participate in. So I don't think in anything I've ever understood about the negotiations with Mrs. May, or indeed about these negotiations with Mr. Johnson, although there's much less that's transparent about any extension in these negotiations, that we could not ask for that extension. And although I accept what you say about their budgetary planning, I think that will be quite readily overcome, because they have a terrible budgetary hole. And at the moment, I haven't told, nobody's told me how they're going to fill the budgetary hole that they get as a result of our departure. And they are not interested in a hard exit, actually. The border has two sides to it. The point about this, which I didn't say at the start and perhaps should have done, because I'm not an economist, and so it's difficult, lawyers hate talking about things they're not absolutely certain about, right? And I'm no different from the rest of them. But having sat on lots of platforms and been in loads of conferences since 2015 on this, I have heard very competent, very respected economists, the majority of them, the large majority of them, say again and again that the economic theory that says you benefit most from completely free trade with your nearest geographic neighbours has been proved almost impossible to refute. That theory has been tested to destruction virtually, and it always comes out that that benefits you the most. So if that's the benefit, that will be a benefit for them as well as for us. I mean, in the Netherlands, my perception is they're definitely not ready for a no deal. In France, they might be a bit more ready. In Denmark, they're not ready. I mean, people will, not just us, but others in the Union will suffer. Ireland, hugely, from no deal. And therefore, actually, the incentive is to try to smooth this transition.
Anyone else, or I'll start asking questions?
Hello, I'm Julia from Robert Morley and Company, and we do pianos in Lewisham. How or will this impact distance selling legislation?
Right, that's a good question, because it's basically a question about will the law change when we leave? Okay. In the short term, particularly if there's a transitional period, nothing changes, because the way this works is although we leave on a particular date, but the way the law works is that we kind of take in all EU law, now apparently with a few exceptions, right? And it becomes UK law. So the distance selling regulations, as far as I'm aware, is not going to be affected by exit. The geo-blocking regulation is not going to be adopted by the government. So you're in the, and that really freaked me out actually when I heard that, because from telling clients the way, look, this is the way the Act works, everything is taken in and becomes UK law. When someone said, despite the fact the geo-blocking regulation becomes law, it became law last December, that will not be continuing. Well, for the transitional period, it definitely will be. We have to keep everything. And if there's new EU law, we get that during the transitional period. But once we leave, I think there will be more pick and choose than perhaps we might have expected at the outset. And therefore, if you're particularly impacted by that legislation, for the moment, everything remains the same. When we leave, really leave, after at the end of any transitional period, you're going to need to check that.
And anything on competition law, Ros, worth mentioning?
Okay, competition law, that's quite an interesting one. I mean, again, during the transitional period, everything stays the same, okay? When we leave, we already see now what regulations the government has tabled for the impact on competition law. Basically, EU competition law will no longer apply here. However, be careful, because if what you do here has an effect in the EU will still catch you for it in relation to what happens in the EU. So you won't have any more dawn raids by the European Commission in the UK, but you will have a significantly strengthened UK competition authority to meet the challenge of all those cases that currently are conducted by the European Commission. They will have to be, well, to the extent they impact the UK, they will have to be taken on by the CMA. There's also this possibility for divergence, because if you read the regulation that deals with competition law post-Exit, you will see that although at the moment we have a fully aligned system of competition law, in other words, you get the same outcome under EU competition law that you would get under UK competition law that you would get under EU competition law, the government has outlined a whole series of factors where after exit the outcome could diverge, including the last one, which is there are 8 factors, and the last one is my favourite, and it says that there could be a different outcome depending on the circumstances of the case.
Yes, question here. Who's got the mic? Thanks, Alice.
Hello, good morning. Matt Lloyd, 3LR, UK Lighting Manufacturers Representative. I have 2 questions actually, one for Tom. Tom, can you, on the inside, can you give us a little bit of optimism or maybe a bit of hope with Ross's statement of it's been tested to destruction, it doesn't work, and now we have a government who are pushing to say we challenge that and we think it will. So maybe give us a bit of insight on the positive side the government are pushing. And then also for Ross and for Charles, do you think there's any more optimism on the deals and the timetable? Because if and when we come out, the countries that are currently dealing with us will want to do business with us. So therefore it won't be, well, we'll get to you when we can. It'll be, we want to get these goods moving again. We want to do a deal. So do you have any optimism in terms of, with the pressure of trade coming back into us, they will want to do those deals quicker than the Canada example you gave?
I mean, certainly it's the sort of government's position that what won't change is that Britain is still the EU's sort of geographically closest large economic partner, and that both sides will want to come to a future relationship, agree a future relationship that benefits both. So I think that talking both as a sort of an official and as an individual, because we are also individual human beings with our own perspectives. I think that there is sort of broadly reason for optimism in the sense that once whatever deal or no deal has come to pass happens, it's not true that it'll be a sort of hard reset, because whatever deal or no deal sort of situation emerges will flavour the initiation of the future relationship agreement sort of process. But both sides will come to the table wanting, I mean, it goes without saying, wanting the best outcome, wanting something that sort of benefits both sides. I don't think anyone's going to go to that negotiating table wanting to spite the other to, the sake of their own sort of viewpoint. So I don't want to delve too much into the specifics of things that are the purview of ministers and that are political decisions, because that's not my realm. But in terms of how we're thinking about, so what are the permutations of a future relationship from sort of the officials' side, we're anticipating that the EU will want to work with us, but in terms of what we bring to the table to that conversation, that's the decision of the elected government, of the ministers within it, and at the moment who those may be when we get to that table are unknown. And so I'm sort of at the same mercies as everyone in this room is, in that we don't know what the situation will be when we get to that table.
Excellent. Right, thanks for that. Ros, Charles, do you want to say anything on that? It's not obligatory, but only if you want to chuck in anything.
Which bit particularly did you want me to comment on? Timescale, yeah. Well, it should be shorter than 7 years. I mean, we've got massive regulatory alignment. And I think at the outset, quite justifiably, the government felt that concluding a trade deal shouldn't be that hard. But when you consider the difficulty that we've had just with the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement, it does make you nervous. But equally, a lot of that was around the backstop. And, that difficult decision about whether we'd stay in the customs union basically indefinitely while we worked out how not to have our border. And now if we put the border in the Irish Sea and, Northern Ireland is in a customs territory, but we can still do the trade deals, hopefully that should be a sort of unblocker. I mean, I think most people, my trade partner thought that 2 years to do it was pushing it, but they might manage it. It's services which is always the most difficult, because the single market in services is still only 60% complete. And with that, it's always a very sensitive issue. So, and 80% of our economy is services. And that's, I think, the biggest worry.
So, yeah, on optimism, the speed of a deal. Now, the one thing that strikes me as quite interesting is if the Lisbon Treaty, which is the famous document that created this Article 50 that gave us 2 years to leave upon declaring it, if that had said 5, what would the conversations in this room be? So at the moment, we'd still have 2 years left in order to finish our arrangements. Sure, it might not be that palatable to us because we'd be in semi-limbo for 5 years, but still, we wouldn't really be thinking, oh, we're in quite a bad situation, we're staring down the barrel of a gun and we don't have something in place. Now, let me promise you, having spoken to people that were in that room for that negotiation, for that treaty, it was the least of all concerns. It was obviously a British author of that article, as we know before, and we've spoken on TV and things like this. But the 2-year caveat was just that. It wasn't one that was really discussed. It was literally just a number that seemed moderately appropriate. So these things about timescales, how far are we through and how far do we need to go? Really, really interesting. If we do give ourselves a bit more time, our expectations and the expectations abroad will change. Optimism, I find a lot. I really do. The UK is such an advanced economy that is so systemically important to the Eurozone economy, but also the world economy. And this is backed up by numbers just from every corner of economics. We are important. We do matter, despite that some people will tell us we are a small island. But there is something that really concerns me, and it's not here. It's over the Channel, it's over the Irish Sea, it's the European Union's way of making decisions. So the ultimate decision-making body in the European Union is called the European Council. We hear loads about it. We just had a summit on the 17th of October, and basically they all sit round, and every single person must agree with the motion on the table, otherwise it's not going to pass. It doesn't work like that in the UK Parliament, for example. It doesn't work like that in the UK Cabinet, in the very government itself, nor the EU Parliament, nor the Commission. But if there's one member state of the 27 that remained when we are trying to negotiate a free trade agreement for our exit at the end of 2020 or whenever it might be, if one member state stands up and says, I don't want this, by the letter of the law, it doesn't stand. So that is a real concern for me. How much does France need to trade with us? An immense amount. Germany, the same. Spain, exactly the same. I'm sure most people in this room do business with the 3 countries that I've just named, but that leaves 24. And any one of which may turn around and say no. Obviously, there's a lot of sort of strong arming, and obviously France and Germany have a huge say in the council, whereas someone else might be able to be overwhelmed by them. But if they were to stick to their guns and to try and block a free trade deal, they would be able to do so by the letter of the European Council's operating code. So that's my concern. My optimism is exactly with you. We're important. They need to trade with us, and I hope that we find something.
Thanks, Charles. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, there's 2. Who's got the mic?
Hi, Paul DeVille, Gobo Plus. It's just a quick question for all 3 of you, really. We're a very small company, and I'd love to be able to afford the money with Ros, for legal advice, but I can't. I'm a small business. For each of you, could you give us 2 things that we should be doing at the top of the list, given the uncertainty, that is affordable to a small business? entertainment technology by its very nature is a small but vibrant sector, but it's made up of small companies, not multinational big companies. So I need to know for small businesses, give us a couple of things that we could be doing that won't necessarily bankrupt us. Oh, sorry, and by the way, Tom, it's not the political issue, it's the indecision that's causing me problems with my business, which isn't one flavour of politician, it's all politicians. So if you pass anything up the chain, can you pass it to all politicians just to give us certainty? I don't care if we stay in or go out, I just want to know how I can plan my business for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything is being disrupted by the uncertainty, isn't it? So I will see what I can do to pass that on to all parties. The nature of how we leave obviously affects what you can do to prepare and how long you have to prepare. So if we do have an extension for sort of 3 months, or it sort of extends further than that, or we only get a technical extension that Macron has sort of mooted for 14 days. Obviously, that's a vast amount of sort of time difference, and again, that's not even withstanding the transition period that's been spoken about and how long that could sort of be extended to into 2022 potentially. The government's advice is to access the materials that the government has published on gov.uk. Various government departments are setting up helplines, either already have or are in the process of setting them up. DEFRA are setting one up, HMRC are setting one up. As I say, due to go live sort of relatively soon. So our advice is initially to use the 60-second checker, which is the function on the gov.uk website that enables you to sort of input your business's specific details and via that guided process access the relevant specific guidance that's been published that'll be relevant to you. Then if you're struggling to wade through it, because admittedly one of the issues the government has faced is that in publishing a vast amount of guidance, there hasn't been time to refine it to answer every single specific question that every single specific sort of organisation, business person could possibly pose. You know, there aren't enough monkeys with keyboards to do that realistically. The next step would be, having read through it, if you're struggling to sort of understand it or process through the volume, use one of the helplines that's set up for the sort of relevant policy department. So if it's import-export issues, for example, policy guidance that you're struggling to wade through, the HMRC helpline would be the one to call. There you get to talk to government officials, the actual policy experts who sort of develop the policy, who actually own the answers and would be able to mine through it and help guide you through to the specific answers to specific questions. That is what we're advising you do at the moment, with the caveat that there are still the unknowns and uncertainties. There are only answers where there are certainties. The government guidance and sort of officials that would be on these helplines wouldn't be speculative, but they, again, it's this sort of listening, iterative process that we completely understand is frustrating. You know, we really sort of painfully, personally understand and feel that It is the political maelstrom that is causing the uncertainty and that is stopping us from being able to generate or identify some of the answers.
But I think
where there
the
are
question
answers.
about small businesses and the finances that aren't at the Resi disposal, is there anything really specific you'd advise any small business, get on this straight away? I mean, certainly one thing, for the two traders organisations, I'm sure I can speak for Peter, we are taking a huge number of calls from our members and we're advising where we can or pointing in the direction of maybe some low cost or free guidance because, that's the best thing we can do in a situation like this, help our members.
Yeah, with smaller businesses, 1 or 2 man operations, it's speed. Get online as quickly as you can. Get through the guidance as quickly as you can and contact the relevant departments as quickly as you can.
So from my side, financial services is a very easy one. The whole reason the whole thing was built is because the whole system is built is because it affords not necessarily the same access for everyone. Obviously, a lot of financial markets are severely dependent on volumes, but at least the products have been invented that allow people to achieve something that going directly to an individual wouldn't do. So this marketplace affords a small business owner or someone working in a small business to set their exchange rate forever. So obviously currencies markets are the thing that I'm here to talk about and the thing that I'm best at professionally. So that's the best one I can give you. The forward contracts are essentially free. Sometimes you have to pay a small amount of collateral to protect their value against your counterparty in the market, but more often than not, it's not that previously, if this market didn't exist, to buy, I don't know, 10,000 US dollars that you need in order to buy something to import to the United Kingdom would have cost you £8,000, for example. You need to pay for that money to have those US dollars to send when you want. But fortunately, developments in financial markets and financial products, and the ones that we offer as well, will allow you to do that essentially for free. If you want certainty in what your things abroad are going to cost you, or if you want certainty on what your product is going to cost someone abroad, you can get those contracts. They're free, they don't cost you anything, and all they allow you to do is have certainty to say, if my product is worth 30,000 US dollars, I can fix 30,000 US dollars in my sterling terms, and I can make sure that what I sell my product for abroad comes into my pocket, my cash flow is fairly settled. The other thing you can do is hedging. If you're not quite happy with where the currency value is at the moment, I won't bore you with all the tools that are in place, partially because their jargon is pretty much created to allow people not to understand them, but they exist and they can allow you to improve your value.
Trevor, did you have a question? Sure.
Hello, yes, Trevor Coley from Sontronics Microphones in Poole. Apart from asking if we can actually stop Brexit and just carry on as we were, and voting Ros for Prime Minister, I have a question. We're a manufacturer, and the EU is our biggest trading bloc. And I understand many people here are running UK businesses, maybe retailers and such, and it's very introspective reaction as to how will it affect me as a business. I'm looking to understand how I mitigate the reaction and effects on my customers, because really nuts and bolts are how much more is it going to cost them on the bottom line. Essentially, okay, if we drop out without a deal, we hear there's moots that, okay, it's going to be a pricing and import cost and customs cost based on World Trade Organization rates. Is that correct? And essentially, if I can go and prepare right now either a no Brexit deal or a Brexit deal and give my clients in Europe the understanding here of preparation of this is going to be the financial impact. It's going to be, let's say, 2.5% tariff for a duty on the goods that we provide you. There are going to be some additional logistics costs which are likely to be within X%. Where can one find that information and prepare in advance?
Ros?
Okay, that's quite a hard question, but I'll do my best. If there's a hard exit, which is, I think, the thing to worry about in the short term, if there's a hard exit, the government has made some statements about what it will do about tariffs. And I'm not sure what the EU's statements are. I mean, I understand about the position on imports. You've got a logistics panel later. Are they dealing with this? Are they dealing with tariffs?
We'll try.
Right, okay. Basically, the government is going to say no tariffs except for certain categories of goods for a limited period. The EU will presumably, if it's a hard exit, just apply its WTO tariffs, and you're going to have to look them up. There are different categorizations of product. I mean, I think also in answer to the earlier gentleman's question, customs brokers are very important people in this situation. Even international courier businesses, I mean, we've been advising FedEx and TNT for a long time, and they have worked incredibly hard to get ready. And being able to deal with the fact that there will be paperwork where previously there was no paperwork. If I was asked the key things that needed to happen, that is a key thing that needs to happen. And actually the information on the government's website about that is good information, but also a customs broker will help you with the impact of tariffs on the products that you're exporting, because they will be able to help you with the right nomenclature for your goods, and you'll be able to get to grips with what the tariffs are on them. But you've also got to deal with your contracts, which was why I made that comment earlier. So under your contracts, who bears the increase in additional tariffs? And you've got to make sure it's your customer. So you've got to look at the clauses in your contracts to make sure that you can achieve that. So those would be, seek advice from a customs broker, use TNT and use FedEx.
Yeah, I mean, we use UPS a lot, and they've been very helpful, and their stance was very much, if we can't help you ship your products, we go out of business. So
yeah,
it's a very good dynamic relationship. My business is sort of different to manufacturing as such, because our life cycle is a very short process. So I don't have many long-term contracts. So it's a very dynamic day-to-day basis. And that was the problem where we ship around the world, and we do ship around the world. We tend to live with whatever needs to be done. The long-term contracts that we have, absolutely right, we are revisiting them and making sure that our customers know that any tariffs their way are their responsibility, as any tariffs our way would be our responsibility, and we need to build that into our business model. So
you do.
You said a broker specifically?
Well, customs brokers. I mean, the people, if I were in the situation where I really didn't have much money to spend on advice, I would be looking to those people who have had to spend money on this. Customs brokers will help you with the paperwork. I mean, I think one of the sort of lost statistics in all of this, of the 240,000 businesses that have never made a customs declaration, that will have to make one, and the latest stats are there's only about 50 or 60,000 of them ready. Right, so how do they get ready? Well, my answer would be find a customs broker, and maybe for a short period use FedEx and TNT to support you about what the steps are that you have to take in order to have the right paperwork. Plus, the government's website is good on this. I mean, I feel that what's on the, I'm not a trade lawyer, but I have to, I've got trade lawyers in my team, and they say they think that the government's website actually has improved exponentially, and there's got some really good information on it. Those are my two things.
Sorry, just to repeat that, just to add in an element of assistance here, we have found our local Chamber of Commerce in Poole has been astonishing in helping, and in fact helped us prepare, for example, working with extra EU territories like Turkey, for example. It's a huge process, and it is, please be ready for this, it is a timely process. It takes hours and maybe days to receive a single document for a single export of, 10 boxes, for example. That's going to happen for every single export into EU. So Chambers of Commerce have pots of money. They've won grants, applied for grants to assist with this funding. And again, bear that in mind as a helping hand.
I would agree with
Thank
that.
you.
And also some small and medium-sized business organisations have also received those grants. I was talking to someone only earlier this week in the Northeast where they've done enormous amounts of work for, I can't think of the name of the organisation, but it basically focuses on small and medium-sized businesses, on both content of contracts and the processes involved in export. Because I think those are the main practical barriers that people will experience in the event of a hard exit.
Can I just pick up on something Trevor said at the very start? It's not inconceivable this could all get cancelled. It could happen. If we did stop the whole thing, people's vote, whatever, two questions, I suppose. Would it be able to go back in trading terms to what it was before? Would the EU just say, oh, fine, all right, carry on as if nothing's ever happened? And what would the impact be on the economy?
It's an interesting one, but it's your first question, would everything go back to normal? As I said, this treaty, this 2005 Article 50 thing gave us a right to leave. It didn't really change anything with respect to taking that back. You would, hypothetically, at least politically, from an EU standpoint, you would be able to do so. Economically, I think economics would be driven by politics, which is what's really messed us all up, to be honest, in this room with respect to certainty. The reason you've seen a fall in the value of the pound, the reason you've seen a fall in GDP forecasts and realised GDP is because people aren't as inclined to do commerce when they don't know what's going to happen. If the political decision was taken to stay within the European Union, socially, would it be acceptable? Maybe not. Maybe this 52-48 or whatever it would turn out to be would come back again. And unfortunately, the impact on GDP and economics would be very, very limited, whilst it would probably support the pound and lead to some kind of inflow of foreign direct investment that's been falling. I don't think we might find a solution quite so quickly.
Yeah. I just thought. Any other questions? Gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Rick from Avolites. We're a manufacturer. Actually, I think there keeps being a muddle up between free trade and compliance and regulatory alignment, and I'm not sure how to keep those separate. In particular, when we exit, how we'll manage things like CE certification. I don't know if anybody wants to give some input. I've read the Blue Book and the government guidance.
Anyone with any knowledge on that? Yes. CE marking, you mean, yes? Yeah. Well, or Roche and we and all the other ones that go along with it, presumably. Yeah.
Okay.
Go on, Ross.
That's actually that's an important question, and it would probably be better if I followed that up afterwards, because my understanding is there is a real problem with mutual recognition about marking in the future, and that although our products will be able to, at the moment our products that bear CE marks conform with EU regulation, but it would appear that we need new marking bodies, UK bodies, to apply the appropriate marks, and those will not be recognised in the EU. Now, I've got one client that's been so adversely affected by that, and they came up with an immensely complicated solution, which I could possibly dig out and see if it would be helpful to you, but the answer is it's not good news. It is really, really not good news. I mean, the idea that you could just substitute UK standard-making approval bodies for EU ones, and the EU would just accept that, I think was always a fiction.
Tom?
What do we say? Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so future alignment between the UK's and EU's regulations will all be dependent on the sort of relationship that's agreed post-deal. And really, that's the comment I can give. We don't know. It's to be decided, and that's something that's sort of is to be decided based on the deal that is to be decided.
This is about whether if you leave and you don't continue either to be a member of the EEA like Norway or have a very, very deep free trade deal, whether you get access to the single market or not. To which the answer is...
So that's all good then. Gentleman here.
The answer is yes. It's called CE UK, so all the CE markings are changing, and that's going on with a huge amount of work at the moment, and that's in events of when we do leave the EU, so the UK markings, safety markings, will be roughly in line to the EU, well, exactly aligned, but it'll be called something different. So that is actually going on now.
Julia.
We're all talking about how much more paperwork we're going to have to do. Does the government have the people in place in order to help and facilitate us doing that?
Currently, on a one-to-one basis, no. That'll be what the helplines are for, so that when it comes to navigating how to do the paperwork and understanding sort of best practice for doing so, those helplines will be available.
But the helplines do take a long time to get answered, and they don't always know the answers to the questions. And there's going to be more and more questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's one assurance I can give is that there's currently we're calling it surging, a massive upstaffing at the front lines to deal with sort of future inquirers. I mean, I think in DCMS, for example, there's only about 1,300, 1,400 staff overall, but I think a third of those have been given over sort of solely to Brexit. In other departments, the policy departments like HMRC and DEFRA that are sort of dealing with the frontline stuff, the number is sort of much higher. There's been a large, sort of massive recruitment drive to get people from outside, sort of just outside the civil service into the civil service to swell the numbers in order to deal with exactly sort of the issues on the ground and provide answers. It's ongoing. It's been ongoing for about 2 years. I can't imagine that we're going to shed any staff over the next couple of years. So every effort is being made to staff the government, sort of operation machinery, to be able to provide those answers. But I can't comment on what individual departments sort of will have in place specifically, because that's sort of their purview. But as I said before, I can sort of recommend that you contact the sort of relevant helplines, and I can only assume that they'll be sort of adequate. I think everyone is going to. The trouble is, no one knows exactly how large a scale the ask is going to be. So the government is preparing for the worst case scenario in that sense.
I was at DEFRA 2 weeks ago, and they're certainly ramping up the number of staff. The problem they face is how quickly can you recruit staff? Are they actually staying in some cases? The retention isn't brilliant at the DEFRA team. And by the way, there are CITES brochures that DEFRA gave us for those you involved with natural materials that are on the tables if any of you want to help with Brexit and CITES. 2 questions at the back. Oh, it's Trevor again. We'll give it to Stuart at the very back first, I think, and then... Oh, it's an add-on, Trevor. That's okay. All right, yeah.
So just to aid, to assist here, through our research, the question the lady just asked then regarding help and assistance, yes, it is very difficult to get quick assistance from government helplines because there are millions of us and there are fewer of them, as simple as that. But one thing, again, through the local Chamber of Commerce, we've discovered that there are grants available for which you can apply. And these are there to assist in Brexit preparations. And that can include custom declarations and also for IT equipment and also staff required to help in the event of Brexit preparation. So again, there are forms and instruments of assistance out there, but they are very difficult to find. One has to wade through pages and pages, as Ros, I'm sure, will attest to this sort of thing. But again, finding brokers and lawyers that can assist will eventually find a needle in a haystack that could actually help lots of people.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you.
Last question, Stuart.
Hi there. Sorry, just to add to this Armageddon scenario. The TUC estimates that we require an extra 5,000 customs officers to meet the demand of all the extra paperwork which we've discussed, and that it takes on average 2 years to train each one of those people. So that to me just says potential gridlock, let's call it. So what preparations are there in place for such a gridlock should we exit next week?
Anyone?
Well, my understanding, this is working, my understanding is that the most senior official responsible for the functioning of the border has said that in the event of a hard exit, there will be a functioning border, but it will be suboptimal. That's what he said. So I can't see how the government's going to train the necessary number of customs officials to give us a really smooth functioning border in the event of a hard exit. And I think one can understand why that would be very difficult. But I do think that if he's made that assessment, and that was before the additional preparations that have most recently been put in hand to meet a hard exit, I think we should assume that there will be a functioning border, but it will be slow. And that's why at the start of what I said, I think everybody needs to, who might be affected by that, needs to make sure that they don't get hung out to dry under the terms of the contracts that they've got.
Could you just speculate how slow? Because I've been trying to factor in what I think a sensible delay would be. Because once that's decided, you can then work backwards.
Well, I think the latest estimates I saw was that it wouldn't function at all well for at least 2 or 3 months. And that could mean, days and days of delay, long tailbacks, big traffic jam in the southeast of England. But that after that initial 3 months, it would function better. I mean, the latest estimates I saw were 15-mile queues. But a lot of businesses have been preparing to use different, the key problem is Dover, and one of my clients was saying to me just the other day, huge amounts of effort have been made to redirect business from Dover in order to reduce the disruptive effects at Dover. So the longer we get, the least disruptive it will be. That's the best I can offer. Maybe the logistics people can do better.
I'd just like to know, I factored in 2 weeks, so where it's 0 now, I've said what happens if it was 2 weeks, what would happen? Would we still be able to manage our exports?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
And I'd like to ask the government if, from their perspective, if that's a sensible time, because we have to have some gauge.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I can go away and find out what Border Force and HMRC's sort of latest estimates are. The two things I would say, though, is that the Border Force sort of upstaffing it sort of began a while ago and is ongoing. An Operation Brock, I believe, has actually been put in place now and has started. So that's the sort of using the M25 and sort of main roads in Kent as sort of car parks essentially for lorries to try and ease congestion and get things moving faster. That's all sort of been implemented or is stood up to be implemented sort of as soon as possible. But I'm afraid I don't have any exact figures on you for exactly how long.
Well, I think the logistics committee hopefully will have some thoughts on that as well. There's certainly been additional ports have been added to the portfolio, which certain products can be brought in and out of the UK. And the government website is updating those. I think 4 more ports were announced a couple of weeks ago. And there are certain designated ports for CITES deliveries and things like that. But I say, hopefully our logistics committee might be able to get into a bit of that. But in the meantime, can we please thank our 3 panelists for doing their very best to answer all the questions?